Story 1. My wife and I scheduled a camping trip in the woods a year ago. She sprained her legs on the rough terrain when we were hiking. She didn't get better, though, and we had to stop there in the middle of nowhere for about an hour. We decided it would be better to set up our tent there, in the heart of the bush, for that reason. I was expecting her legs would mend soon with rest. She went into a deep sleep as soon as I set up the tent after I'd given her some painkillers. The surroundings started to appear gloomy as the sun started to set. I strolled in the vicinity, gathering wood to build a fire and maybe prepare dinner. As I proceeded to chop some branches, I discovered that the axe was extremely dull. Nevertheless, I succeeded in trimming a couple of branches, and as I was about to finish, I detected a faint noise. Someone clearing their throat. When I turned to face him, I saw that it was an elderly man instead of my wife. Confusion-stricken, I gave him a confused smile and he moved in my direction. The man grinned back and said, "I'm from there," in a quiet voice. I didn't feel well about the whole thing, so I nodded my head and continued with whatever I was doing. That man kept looking over to the side of the road as though he was speaking to someone, but every time I looked over my shoulder, I saw nothing. He then started asking if I needed his assistance. He persisted, and I tried to be as courteous as I could by smiling and shaking my head, but he remained respectful. But when I consistently declined his assistance, he became a little irate and demanded, in a tone that bordered on brutality, that I aid me. I was going to stop eating that man's food. I pivoted to face the man and firmly requested that he leave me alone. I honestly believed my threat would work, but it was obvious he was unaffected. He just stood there, staring at me, and then I felt shivers run down my spine because he suddenly started laughing hysterically. I realized then that something was really wrong and that I had to leave him as soon as possible. In an attempt to return as quickly as possible to my tent, I bent down to pick up the gathered wood, but as soon as I turned around, the man swung my axe at me. With a swift reflex, I grasped his hand and succeeded in pushing him, causing him to fall to the floor. With a grunt, he headed for the wooded edge, the exact area he had been inspecting moments before. I didn't spend much time there, not in a manner, fearing. The man could bring his group with him. I ran back to our tent. My wife had heard my loud footsteps and woke up. I informed her that we had to go right away and that there was no time for further explanations. We hurried to our car, leaving all of our possessions behind. I was quite watchful and constantly glanced over my shoulder in case the man or anyone else was following us. However, what's the deal? We eventually returned to our car after a good 2 hours. My wife's ankle was causing her a lot of trouble, so she was in pretty poor shape. We had to sprint downward, and her feet suffered from the rapid fall. We got to the car, and that's when I told her everything. I saw the color go out of her face. She felt really afraid. She immediately called 911 and gave me the full story while I drove to the closest clinic to take care of her foot. The police claimed they would check the woods, but because they didn't return our calls, my wife and I am very sure they didn't do anything. Furthermore, it makes sense given the dense jungle. Although my wife's feet gradually recovered, the experience is still vivid in my memory, and I would never dare to go camping again. Story 2. My family and I used to go camping a lot when I was a child. Since we were on a tight budget, camping served as our entry point. Dad's pickup would carry a huge tent that could accommodate all 3 of us, and we would ride it to various locations. There was also a window feature on our large tent that allowed us to view outside. I would wake up in the morning with the light shining on me, which gave me a positive feeling. After a strenuous trip through the woods in the evening, Mom would prepare delectable dishes on our ancient Coleman portable stove. Later, Dad would build a fire, and the 3 of us would assemble for dinner. I still recall those carefree times. Sincerely, those were the happiest moments of my youth. However, I can still feel the chills running down my spine, remembering one specific trip. I was snug in my sleeping bag and could see the gorgeous night sky because of the location of the tent. It appeared stunning. I quickly fell asleep, and when I woke up, I felt as though I was in my own bed because of the sudden explosion of life outside the tent window. Our day's itinerary included hiking into the jungle, gathering firewood, and savoring each second. We were all somewhat worn out by the evening. We ate dinner, then curled up fast in our sleeping bags and called it a night. I made careful to let some fresh air in through the tent window. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, I noticed something strange. I thought I saw something move, but I wasn't sure if it was just a dream or if I had fallen asleep. As I massaged my eyes in an attempt to concentrate, I heard Mom ask Dad if he had also seen it. I saw Dad move to have a better look by moving closer to the tent window. He inhaled sharply, as if all of his air had just been pulled out. I've never seen that look on his face before, even to this day. My parents leaned in close to give me a bear hug while scowling out the window. There was a great deal of tension inside the tent, but no one dared to speak. We were staring at a strange man who was 20 feet away from us when our heartbeats could practically be heard outside. In addition, the man's appearance was further enhanced by the white mask he was wearing, which had holes cut out for his mouth and eyes. He simply stood there, gazing at us without moving. He appeared to be holding out for something. I could feel my heartbeat quickening and my palms becoming perspiration-y. Even though my family and I had gone camping a lot, we had never come across anything quite so scary. The creep quickly inched closer while keeping a safe distance. The mask prevented any of us from seeing his face, yet it appeared as though he was looking directly into our eyes. We stood back and let the guy stare at us for what felt like 5 minutes. The man didn't come right up to the tent, but we were all terrified that at any moment he would charge toward us. After a few minutes, the man approached our tent with increasingly loud footsteps. I was clueless, and my heart was pounding. My folks felt the same way. As when he got close to the tent's window, it revealed that 3 persons were inside. Seeing all 3 of us, I believe that's what stopped him from doing whatever he was considering, because the man retreated into the shadowy jungle. We all 3 exhaled deeply with relief as soon as he was gone. As we all clasped hands, I noticed tears trickling down my mother's cheeks. Dad was the only one who appeared somewhat strong, but even he was scared. I was crying too. Dad encircled Mom with his arm, reassuring her that we will all survive. I realized I needed to have strength as well. We all waited for the night to pass, and when daylight finally arrived, we hurriedly packed up our belongings and left for home. After that, we did go camping, but it was never in a lonely location. Everybody in my family gets a noticeable shock when we talk about that occurrence sometimes. We all think we were lucky that night. I wonder what would have happened to us if we had been alone. Story 3. I was an avid camper back in the day. Thus, I embarked on a new endeavor as a camp counselor last summer during my university vacation, taking a group of high school students to Lake Marina Country Park. It was an isolated camp deep in the bush, one that seemed to be in nirvana. In addition to having a beautiful view, the location was convenient in terms of travel time because it was in San Diego. It wasn't too hard for us to get to the campsite at night. The trail was simple, the moon was pale, and the gorgeous lake nearby shimmered strangely. The job of a camp counselor wasn't as simple as I had assumed. It took a lot to get everyone together, with youngsters chatting and running around with excitement. I gathered some fuel, built a small bonfire, and put it in a circle. After that, light a match and see the flickering flame in the forest. As the youngsters gathered around the campfire, cooking hot dogs and marshmallows, their faces beaming with anticipation, the atmosphere was exuberant. We alternated between dancing, singing, and telling jokes, and the night was full of laughter and conversation. It was a huge joy. Everybody was having a fantastic time. It felt as though time passed by without our awareness, and before we knew it, midnight had arrived. I had to tell everyone it was time to call it a night and put an end to the festivities. We had a lengthy hike the following day, after all. Everyone made their way to their own tents. Set up at the far end of the campsite, my own tent was sure to cause me some trouble at night because of the restless energy and joyful chattering of the kids. Minutes passed, and the sound eventually subsided. leaving the encampment in utter quiet. But even in the quiet and serenity, I was unable to drift off to sleep. My mind was racing as I lay there in the dark, unable to get rid of a nagging feeling. I checked my phone out of habit and saw that it was 1:15 a.m. When I couldn't sleep, I would usually scroll through Instagram or Facebook, but there was no network there. I just kept looking up at the tent because I was so bored. I heard a twig snap suddenly. I awoke, struggling to identify who it might be but failing miserably. I dismissed it, supposing it must have been an animal. Subsequently, though, I heard footsteps. They continued to get closer. My blood ran cold at that very instant, as I recall. But suddenly, I felt a rush of bravery and made the decision to exit the tent. I turned on the torchlight and flicked out my phone because it was pitch black outside. I saw no one in the vicinity. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I exclaimed, a little tense. There was no reply. I returned to the tent, reasoning that it was simply a trick of my worn-out mind. That uneasy feeling persisted in me. Something was seriously wrong because I had a heavy feeling in the pit of my stomach. I made an effort to go to sleep. I was startled to hear a scratching sound coming from my tent side. My body went cold and my heart grew heavy. I became really alarmed as the scratching sound continued to get louder. I was crossing my fingers, trying not to freak out, and trying to remain composed. Unfortunately, it didn't. I was about to lose my whole universe when I heard a quiet voice pleading, "Let me in, let me in." I completely lost my poise. I had no idea who it was or what in the world it wanted. All I knew was that I needed to wait it all out in silence and with prayer. Slowly the time went by and suddenly there was no more scratching. That night I couldn't sleep because I was so terrified. There was always a sense of unease about what could come next. As soon as the sun came up the next morning, I informed every camper about what had happened the night before. They truly looked to exhibit remarkable bravery, even though they were just high school students. It impressed me. All of us go out to find whatever might be hiding at night. Sadly, all we could find was the sound of footsteps heading into the jungle surrounding the tent. But since everyone was racing around the campsite that night, it might have been one of us. Still, I knew that if we stayed there that night, the odd creature would return too. I then led the team back and reported the incident to the police. Not much could be done by the police squad either. It was a dense forest after all. But that experience raised a lot of questions for me, questions I will never be able to fully address. And I would never dare go camping again, alone or with others. I say no, no, no.